Chronovey presents the Dyatlov Pass Incident, 9 hikers, 1 night, and a mystery frozen in time. Chapter 1. The Final Trek. In the dead of the Soviet winter, on January 27, 1959, 10 young adventurers, most of them students from the Ural Polytechnic Institute, embarked on a ski trek deep into the icy wilderness of the northern Ural Mountains. It was a trek designed to challenge their bodies, test their endurance, and solidify their place as elite hikers. The journey was a requirement to achieve Grade 3 certification, the highest level possible under the Soviet mountaineering system, and one that demanded crossing more than 300 kilometers in hostile, often uninhabited terrain. Their expedition leader, Igor Alexeyevich Dyatlov, was 23 years old, respected among his peers, and known for being meticulous and disciplined. Under his guidance were 9 others, all with various strengths: engineering students, radio operators, experienced skiers, and in one case, a World War II veteran. The group: Igor Dyatlov, 23, expedition leader; Yuri Doroshenko, 21, radio engineering student; Ludmila Jubanina, 20, civil engineering student, known for her toughness; Yuri Krivonashenko, 23, construction and hydraulics, cheerful, prankster; Alexander Kolevatov, 24, nuclear physics student; Rustam Slobodin, 23, mechanical engineering graduate; Nikolai Thibault-Brignoles, 24, most athletic, multi-sport champion; Semyon Zolotaryov, 38, military veteran, instructor, mysterious addition; Zinaida Kolmogorova, 22, experienced hiker, well-liked; Yuri Yuding, 21, the 10th member, who turned back due to health issues. Yuding, suffering from sciatica and joint pain, left the group on January 28, a decision that would save his life. He would later say that something about the expedition felt different. That Dyatlov had been tense. That Semyon Zolotaryov, the older, military man who joined the group late, had been reserved and difficult to read. The journey begins. The route took them through Ivdel, a remote town in Sverdlovsk Oblast, and then by truck to Vizhay, the last inhabited settlement on the edge of the forest. From there, the hikers began their ski trek northeast, aiming for Mount Otorten, a peak whose Monsa name ominously translates to "don't go there." By all accounts, the group was strong, prepared, and in good spirits. Photographs recovered later show smiles, snowball fights, and playful notes in their journals. They wrote about cooking meals, repairing bindings, singing songs. They even crafted a satirical newspaper called the Evening Otorten, filled with mock headlines like "The abominable snowman stalks us in the woods." But the terrain was unforgiving: steep hills, strong winds, waist-deep snow. Temperatures dropped as low as -30 degrees Celsius at night. Still, they made steady progress. On February 1st, the group made a puzzling decision. Rather than descend into the forested valley for shelter, they pitched their tent on the exposed slope of Kholat Syakhl, another mountain whose name in Monsi means Mountain of the Dead. This choice is one of the great mysteries. Why camp in the open, on a wind-battered slope, when just 1.5 kilometers away, trees offered windbreak and firewood? Possibilities include: they lost daylight and stopped where they were. Dyatlov didn't want to lose elevation. Or, most intriguingly, they were avoiding something in the trees. There were no signs of struggle, no alarm, no external threat visible. That night, the temperature dropped below -25 degrees Celsius. Snow began to fall. Winds howled across the ridge. And then, sometime in the darkness, everything collapsed. When the search team found the tent weeks later, it had been slashed open from the inside. Boots were still neatly arranged inside. Jackets and gear untouched. 9 people had fled barefoot or in socks into sub-zero darkness, abandoning food, knives, axes, and survival gear. They ran downhill, toward the trees. Some made it nearly 1.5 kilometers. Others didn't get far. But none would survive. It would take over a month for all the bodies to be recovered. And when they were, the scene was far worse than anyone could have imagined. Chapter 2. The Discovery. The first sign that something had gone wrong came weeks later, when the hikers' families, worried after hearing nothing, demanded action. On February 20, 1959, a volunteer search party was organized. Initially, it was made up of fellow students and local volunteers, but as days passed, it grew to include soldiers, monster hunters, and eventually, KGB observers, a detail rarely emphasized in early reports. After days of combing the snowy wilderness, the search team spotted something strange on February 26th. It was the group's tent, half buried in snow, standing alone on the slope of Kholat Syakhl, torn open violently from the inside. That one detail changed everything. The tent. It was still anchored to the snow, but had collapsed on one side. Inside, the group's boots, jackets, stoves, and maps remained, untouched. Their journals were there. Their cameras. Their food. But their owners were gone. Slash marks in the fabric, made from inside the tent, suggested panic. Why would experienced hikers rip their only shelter apart from within, in sub-zero temperatures, and flee into the open night? Even stranger, barefoot prints, visible in the snow, led away from the tent. Some were wearing only socks. One had a single felt shoe. All of them were clearly underdressed for the deadly cold. The tracks led downslope, to the edge of the forest. The first bodies. At the base of the hill, beneath a large cedar tree, two frozen bodies were found. Yuri Krivonyshenko and Yuri Doroshenko. They were in their underwear, barefoot, and had built a small fire. Branches broken from above head height indicated a frantic attempt to climb or gather wood. The skin on their fingers and feet was burned. There were signs they had bitten their own hands, perhaps to stay awake or from pain. Nearby, three more bodies were found: Igor Dyatlov, Zinaida Kolmogorova, and Rustam Slobodin, lying in various positions between the tree and the tent, as if they had tried to crawl back, but froze on the way. Slobodin's skull had a linear fracture, yet no soft tissue damage, the type of injury you might expect from a sudden fall, or blunt force trauma in deep cold. It would take over 2 more months to find the rest. On May 5th, deep in a ravine further into the forest, searchers discovered the remaining 4 hikers: Ludmila Dubinina, Alexander Kolevatov, Nikolai Thibault-Brignoles, and Semyon Zolotaryov. They were found under 4 meters of snow, in what appeared to be a makeshift shelter dug into the hillside. And what was found there defied belief. The injuries. Dubinina's tongue was missing, as well as her eyes and parts of her lips. Her ribs were crushed, with internal bleeding, but no external bruising. Thibault-Brignoles had a massive skull fracture comparable to a car crash, yet no sign of struggle. Zolotaryov, the military veteran, had 5 broken ribs and missing eyes, yet still clutched a notebook in one hand. These weren't injuries consistent with hypothermia or a simple avalanche. They were described by the lead medical examiner, Dr. Boris Vozrozdeny, as the kind of trauma caused by a force equal to that of a car crash, yet without corresponding surface wounds. One investigator noted, "It was as if they were crushed from the inside out." The clothing. Some of the hikers had stripped clothing from others, a well-known phenomenon in late-stage hypothermia called paradoxical undressing. But there was something stranger. Tests revealed that some of the clothes were mildly radioactive, especially items worn by Kolevatov and Krivonyshenko. No explanation was ever given. Soviet authorities labeled the radiation inconsequential, but kept the detail buried in classified files for decades. The official response. As the story gained attention, Soviet authorities rushed to close the case. The final verdict? The hikers died as a result of an unknown compelling force. No names. No responsible party. No follow-up. The area was immediately restricted for hikers for the next 3 years. Documents were sealed, investigators reassigned, and family members told to remain silent. Chapter 3: Theories, Shadows, and Silence. When an incident defies logic, reason quickly gives way to speculation. And in the case of Dyatlov Pass, the absence of clarity has spawned a forest of theories, some grounded in science, others in conspiracy, folklore, and fear. No theory explains everything, but nearly every theory explains something. Let's begin with the most official and most fragile. Theory 1: Avalanche. In 2019, Russian prosecutors reopened the case. Their conclusion? An avalanche had startled the hikers, forcing them to flee the tent in panic, and some had been buried or injured in the chaos. It's a clean explanation, but not a convincing one. First, the slope they camped on is not avalanche-prone. The grade is too shallow. There was no debris pattern when the tent was found, and the tent, half buried, still stood. An avalanche powerful enough to break ribs and crack skulls should have obliterated it. And what of the tent being cut from the inside? Even the 2020 National Geographic reconstruction, which tried to simulate a slab avalanche, failed to account for how all 9 hikers fled with such little clothing, yet left behind every essential survival item. Theory 2: Infrasound-induced panic. Proposed by researcher Donny Icar, this theory suggests that the specific wind conditions near the mountain could have created infrasound, low-frequency sound waves inaudible to humans, but capable of causing extreme psychological distress, nausea, or panic. According to this theory, a wind vortex in the pass may have triggered disorientation or intense fear, leading the group to flee irrationally. But it falls apart when one considers how methodically they moved. They walked in an organized line, downhill, not like people in a blind panic. They built a fire, tried to return to the tent. That's rational survival behavior, not hysteria. And it doesn't explain the severe internal injuries or missing eyes and tongue. Theory 3: Soviet military testing. This theory points to the possibility that the hikers stumbled into a weapons testing zone. Sporadic parachute mine tests, chemical dispersal experiments, or even radioactive field tests may have occurred without warning, explaining internal injuries without external wounds, blast wave, radioactive traces on clothing, government secrecy, KGB presence during investigation. One detail often cited: orange orbs in the sky seen by other hikers and locals around the same time, documented in declassified Soviet reports. Also, Krivonashenko and Kolevatov had connections to classified work in nuclear facilities. Still, no physical trace of an explosion, ordnance was found. And it doesn't explain the orderly footprints leading from the tent. Theory 4: KGB operation or internal conflict. Some researchers suggest that Semyon Zolotaryov, the oldest and most enigmatic hiker, may have been a covert agent. He joined the group at the last minute, had military tattoos never explained, and was found with a camera around his neck, not recorded in the inventory. According to this theory, Zolotaryov and 1 or 2 others may have been on a separate mission, and something went wrong, perhaps a confrontation, a betrayal, or exposure to a secret they weren't supposed to see. This could explain why some hikers were more violently injured. Certain belongings, like second cameras, were hidden. The investigation was suppressed so quickly. But again, no hard evidence. Just patterns in the dark. Theory 5: Yeti or Monsi attack. Popularized in documentaries and internet forums, some suggest that the group was attacked, either by a wild animal, a Monsi hunting party, or even a cryptid like a Yeti. However, there were no signs of struggle, no extra footprints, and the Monsi people were known to be peaceful and helpful to lost travelers. While the hikers did write a joke in their mock newspaper about the abominable snowman stalking them, there is zero evidence that anything paranormal or violent approached their tent from outside. It is, in many ways, a narrative born of desperation. Because the reality is too silent. Why no theory fits? Each theory attempts to explain part of the puzzle, but none can explain it all. Why was the tent cut from the inside? Why did they flee barefoot in an orderly line? Why were some of them crushed internally? Why did the government shut down the site for years and restrict documents for decades? And why were no conclusive answers ever allowed to emerge? Even the 2019 case reopening ended with no new charges, no detailed findings, no declassification of key materials. Just a few vague lines. The group perished due to exposure, following a natural force they could not overcome. And with that, the silence was restored. Chapter 4: Echoes in the Cold. Theories that refuse to die. More than 60 years have passed since that frozen night on Kholat Syakhl. Governments have changed. Maps have been redrawn. But one thing hasn't faded. The mystery still breathes. Not because we don't have enough theories, but because we have too many. Each decade, a new wave of researchers, writers, filmmakers, and investigators tries to pull truth from the white fog of the Urals. And yet, the deeper they dig, the colder the trail becomes. But some theories, those that live in the shadows, persist. The parachute mine hypothesis. One of the more technical theories centers on Soviet parachute mines, aerial devices dropped in tests, which detonate just above ground level. The resulting blast wave could crush internal organs without leaving external injuries, especially if someone were lying down. This could explain the massive internal damage, the soft tissue loss, tongue, eyes, from heat and decomposition, the lack of direct trauma wounds. It also ties into the military secrecy, radiation traces, and reports of orange glowing orbs in the sky the night of February 1st, seen by locals and other hikers. But critics argue, why would the group have camped in a known test zone? Why was there no scorched earth, metal fragments, or crater? Was the test secret even to them? Biological or psychological factors. Some theories attempt to humanize the event. What if it wasn't external at all? What if it was a shared psychotic episode, brought on by exhaustion, extreme cold, or even accidental poisoning from stove fumes or spoiled food? Could the group have panicked, imagined a threat, and fled? Problem is, hallucinations don't crush ribs, and group hysteria doesn't typically result in such methodical movement, fire building, and clothing removal from dead companions, unless something more was at play. Secret space or high-altitude tech testing. Some theorists have pointed to early Soviet aerospace testing, prototypes of high-altitude aircraft, sonic weaponry, or even rocket re-entry vehicles. According to this angle, the hikers were accidental witnesses to something they shouldn't have seen. One possibility, a test went wrong, causing injuries through shockwaves. Another, they were deliberately silenced. But again, no wreckage, no official confirmation, and most supporting documents remain classified or conveniently lost. Still, some declassified files mention KGB units arriving on the scene before the civilian searchers, a detail few discuss openly. A natural but unknown phenomenon? Some modern scientists have speculated that the answer might lie not in conspiracy, but in a natural phenomenon that we still don't fully understand. One such theory, katabatic winds, sudden, violent gusts of descending air that can sound like a jet engine and drop temperatures in minutes. These winds can create auditory illusions and destroy tents. Another, carbon monoxide poisoning from the group's stove setup, causing nausea, dizziness, and confusion. Even micro-avalanches, thin slabs of snow that shift beneath heavy footfalls, have been modeled as a trigger. But even these natural explanations all hit the same wall. They might explain why the hikers left the tent, but they don't explain the extreme injuries, radiation, or government silence. The cultural impact. Over the decades, Dyatlov Pass has become more than a mystery. It's become a mirror, a reflection of the Cold War, of Soviet secrecy, of fear and uncertainty. A story that shifts depending on who tells it, and why. Books, documentaries, fiction films, even horror video games, have drawn inspiration from this icy enigma. It haunts the Russian consciousness. It intrigues the West. It inspires curiosity in new generations, who ask the same question the original investigators couldn't answer. What happened that night on the mountain? And why has the truth never been fully told? Chapter 5. Frozen in Time. What remains unanswered? Years have passed. Generations have turned over. But the snow on Kholat Syakhl never forgets. 9 lives were lost on that mountain, but what truly vanished was their final hour. No diaries, no voice recordings, no survivors. Only torn fabric, frost-bitten hands, and cryptic autopsy notes. The Soviet state declared the case closed in 1959. But for the families, the investigators, the historians, and even the strangers fascinated by this case, the silence never sounded like closure. The unfinished questions. We still don't know. What exactly made them flee their only shelter? Why no one returned, even partially dressed, despite being only 100 yards from safety? How Djubanina's tongue was removed without external wounds? Why some bodies were radioactive? Why the tent was carefully cut from inside, not torn by force or nature? Why the government sealed the investigation, restricted the site, and locked away files for decades? We also don't know why Zolotaryov, the oldest and most trained among them, was found with a camera that nobody had listed. Or what happened to the missing pages of the group's journal? Or why photographs recovered from their rolls seem to skip time and show blurry, streaked light orbs in the final frames. Graves without truth. The hikers were buried with honor, but not closure. Their families were told not to ask questions. Their graves became places of pilgrimage and resistance. Yuri Yudin, the sole survivor, spent the rest of his life haunted by one question. If I had stayed, would they still be alive? Or would I be buried beside them? Until his death in 2013, Yudin remained convinced that the truth was never told. Files still locked. Some files on Dyatlov remain sealed by Russian intelligence. Others have been lost or accidentally destroyed. Theories that involve the KGB, nuclear programs, or psychological experiments remain officially unacknowledged, even when independent researchers offer proof. In 2020, a new official conclusion blamed a rare kind of snow slab. But it did not address any physical injury inconsistencies, classified records, or radiation data. It was a conclusion of convenience, not of truth. A mystery that lives. And so we are left with this. 9 young people, intelligent, strong, experienced, died in one of the most inexplicable events in modern history. Every attempt to explain their deaths leaves something behind. Every theory solves one piece, but breaks another. They were caught between forces we still don't fully understand, natural or man-made. And perhaps that's why this story lingers. Because in the snow, in the silence, in the eyes that were never found, we see not just a mystery, but a mirror. Final words. Their names were Igor Dyatlov, Zinaida Kolmogorova, Rustam Slobodin, Lyudmila Djubanina, Yuri Doroshenko, Yuri Krivonyshenko, Alexander Kolevatov, Nikolai Thibault-Brignoles, Semyon Zolotaryov. They walked into the cold for a dream. They vanished in the name of silence. And the mountain never gave them back.